Somebody shared this Twitter thread from a couple days ago, and I found it absolutely fascinating for a couple of reasons. For one, I actually live just outside of Philly. I'm not in Philly, I'm just outside of Philly. But they did one of these soda taxes, and this goes to show you the problem with overtaxing and why tax cuts can actually increase tax revenue. My God, it sounds counterintuitive, but so does a Chinese finger trap. Okay? Today, I want to talk about the issue of taxation and how cutting taxes can actually be better for everyone, and you got to find that happy medium of what percentage is going to maximize your revenue and be best for the economy. Because this is a really good example of how they screwed up. This is from a guy on Twitter named Bansi Sharma. I don't know who that is. He's just a whatever, but he's got this Twitter thread, so let's read it. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, Philadelphia edition. Nearly 2 years ago, Philadelphia passed a soda tax, a hefty 1.5 cents per ounce, or $1 tax on a typical 2-liter bottle, as a sin tax in the national war on obesity. Now the verdict is in. But I also want to point something else out too. I don't believe taxes should ever be punitive or should be engineering. The point of taxing the soda is to kind of punish people and make them not want to do it, right? Oh, don't buy that soda, it's too expensive. No, that's not what taxes should be for. Admittedly, they say, I believe some of the taxes will go to like healthcare stuff. Okay, that's fine. Like taxing gas to help cover the cost of infrastructure and roads, I think that makes sense. Although we're going to talk about why overtaxation is a really big problem. So, but we will read on. Philadelphians didn't cut calories as a result of the tax on sweetened drinks, nor did they shift towards drinking anything healthier. Instead, most of them just drove outside the city to buy the same old sodas from stores where they didn't have to pay the tax. Therein lies a huge problem. The city increased the tax on drinks. What happened? They sold less sodas, which means lower profits for the stores and lower tax revenue. It hurt everybody. Increasing tax does not equal good economy and more taxes. All right, let's read on. Meanwhile, the poorest in the city, those who would find it hardest to drive for many miles to buy soda, just ended up paying more in taxes. We find no significant reduction in calorie and sugar intake, conclude researchers Stephen Saylor from Stanford University, Anna Tuckman from Northwestern, and Song Yao from the University of Minnesota in a study published this week. Quote from the study, "The tax does not lead to a shift in consumption towards healthier products. It affects low-income households more severely, and it is limited in its ability to raise revenue." I will point out, though, if you're trying to stop poor people from drinking sugary drinks, it seems like it may have worked, but the big problem is you're not stopping them from drinking sugary drinks. You're impacting them, you're taking away some of their resources, but it just means that they've got to spend more money on the same drinks, and they're probably, as they mentioned, it didn't cut calories. Poor people are just losing more money. You're not taxing the rich on this one, you're taxing the poor. So they say, as the obesity epidemic affects the poor disproportionately, they say, the tax imposes a relatively larger financial burden on low-income, high obesity households that are less likely to engage in cross-shopping at stores outside of the city. They also note that this dismal outcome is wildly at odds with earlier optimistic economic forecasts about how such soda taxes would fare. A variety of economists using spreadsheets and theoretical economic models predicted that taxing sugar drinks would lead to sharp falls in the amount of them that are drunk, especially by the poor. Compared to the decrease of 51,000 ounces of taxed beverages at the average store in Philadelphia, we find an even larger increase of 61,000 ounces per store in stores up to 2 miles away from the big city, the researchers found. Apparently, none of this was accurately forecast using economic models. A tax designed to improve health of the poor does no such thing, but instead just ends up enriching the city coffers by further impoverishing the very poor it was allegedly intended to help. The end. But it gets better. He says, oh my God, the soda tax fiasco in Philadelphia is even worse than what I thought. See this thread for additional color on this. And this is a tweet that says, the devastation caused by this is real. Real people, real families, the public health advocates supporting this should all be held accountable for their role in the travesty. So we'll pop this one up and we'll see. But I want to tell you a story. Okay, first of all, many of you know, I am a social liberal. And so that means I'm okay with many taxes in many areas. And I don't think cutting taxes in some areas makes sense. But I'm center left, I'm not far left, and so that means I am fairly, capitalistic. But I want to tell you a story now that kind of shapes my ideology. There was a Home Depot in Cook County, which is Chicago, it's where I'm from. My friend's dad was a contractor, And he was explaining to me why increasing taxes doesn't increase revenue. It's counterintuitive. In Cook County, they raised the sale tax by a small fraction of a percent. Tax revenue went down in many areas. I believe overall it went down a little bit. This is because contractors like him who spend hundreds of thousands of dollars have to take that tax into consideration. Now look, if you want to tax sodas like on $1, sure, the average person who spends, $3 to $5 on a 2-liter, whatever, they're not going to notice that dollar necessarily. They probably will, but it's affecting a huge spread of people. However, the people who are buying crates full of the drink are seeing that. Let's say you have a company function and you need to buy 100 2-liters. It's an extra $100 on top. You're going to drive to a store outside to spend less because it could save you $100. That means something. So here's what he said. I would be willing to drive an extra 20 miles with a truck to DuPage County, which is a suburb of Chicago to the west, because I could save $20,000, maybe $50,000 on purchases because this is huge for my business. If you're putting in millions of dollars of orders for tons of equipment, you see that. Right on, you could save 20 grand. I'm not gonna, and that means the city loses all of their tax revenue because they tried to gain a little bit, and that's the problem. Well, let's see what he says. Actually, let's jump over to this other thread he points out. Steven Snyder, I don't know who this is, said there's his initial tweet. Mayor Jim Kenney said it would improve public health while funding universal pre-K preschool. 2 years in, the policy hasn't delivered on that elite ideological goal. But the tax has come at the expense of working people and other vulnerable Philadelphians. Mr. Brown has shrunk his workforce by 200 by not filling jobs when they go empty. And the Harvard ShopRite closure will eliminate 111 more jobs through attrition. It'd be nice if the rich white males drinking their $200 bottles of scotch while supporting this tax could have just a little of empathy for those less fortunate. It's really funny how it's the wealthy white progressives, he points out, drinking their $200 bottles of scotch, which have negatively impacted the economy, not just tax revenue. Let's see how Bonsi continues. There's been excellent dialogue generated by this thread. It is gratifying to see some people actually changing their views on sin taxes based on this evidence. Many have drawn the logical conclusion that for it to be effective, a sin tax has to be state nationwide. Personally, I find numerous problems with sin taxes, whether they be local, statewide, or nationwide. For one thing, they set up a perverse conflict of interest between the state and the citizens. Good intentions aside, legislators rarely, if ever, plan on having zero revenue from sin taxes in future years, even as that would be the case if the taxes worked as advertised. And another important point to bring up, laws can incentivize not preventing the behavior, but just punishing people. Like, there's a certain portion of most cities' revenue comes from speeding tickets. They don't want people to stop speeding. They want them to speed more because it pays the bills when people do it. Fines are supposed to stop a behavior. We ticket you as a penalty for breaking the law. But so often we see that they don't want these things to stop. And here's the thing. If people stop speeding, they have to lower the speed limit again because they need that revenue. He says, in most cases, legislators bake the tax revenues into their forecasts and start spending them. As the revenue streams dwindles, they find other ways to make up the shortfall or resort to deficit financing. Either way, sin tax turns out to be a canard to raise tax revenues. Do you know that the cigarettes that are confiscated by New York State to stop illicit cross-border trade in cigarettes, instigated by high taxes on cigarettes, are not destroyed but sold by the state through the back door to raise revenue for the state? Some sin tax, huh? The city, the state, they actually sell cigarettes that they confiscated. Because it's not about stopping the behavior, it's about making money. And this is one of the big problems with these penalty taxes or sin taxes. So all things considered, where do I come out on sin taxes? My considered view is this: government should be in the education business so far healthcare issues are concerned. Government should not do a perfunctory job of educating, but a very thorough job by deploying impartial and best scientific evidence available, and by deploying the best authorities in the field to stake their personal reputations in bringing the best information to people. Government should also get out of the tax incentives punishment based behavior modification business altogether to avoid a paternalistic and or adversarial relationship with its citizens. Yeah, and you can think about it that way too. The idea that the government knows better, So they're going to tax you in a certain way to guide your behavior. There's two functions to these taxes. Taking the money from the tax to fund a program to rectify the problem, and also engineering society. And I think that's, I disagree with that to an extent, right? I recognize regulation is important. I recognize that fines are really important. The problem we need to figure out how to solve is how the government comes to rely. They rely on this to function. And there was one story I read maybe like a year ago where revenues from tickets had dropped dramatically. And a city was in trouble because people weren't speeding anymore, and now they weren't going to be able to afford their police. Essentially, fining people was how they actually funded things, and thus it's a tax on the poor. This is why I'm actually in favor of a progressive tax. Think about it this way. If a person who makes $10 million a year is driving down the street going 100 miles an hour, and they get pulled over, they get a $100 fine, they say, sure, whatever. But that $100 fine to someone who makes $30,000 a year is a serious problem. There's got to be some way, at least in my opinion, some people might recognize, well, the guy, he's earned the right to speed, I suppose, and I disagree. Some countries do something interesting where a speeding ticket is a percentage of income, and that would probably work to stop people from speeding. The problem is, once again, the state comes to rely on this for revenue, and they forecast their yearly projections and goals and budgets based on fining people and taxing their sugary beverages. It doesn't seem to work. Anyway, thanks for hanging out. I'm a bit wiped. I'm going to go chill out, and I'll see you guys tomorrow on the main channel at 4 p.m.